It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So hype right now. Anything's possible. Oh, my mama. Oh, my lady, ma. Anything's possible.
Rain and J's back with the vengeance. All the real Celtics fans in attendance. This the truth like 34. This like walking in the garden when you hear the roars. The crowd goes crazy. Most in-depth coverage on the daily. Mainly podcast royalty, the content kings. When you talking about the franchise with 17 rings. Focus like Danny at the deadline. Global, but it got a local feel like the red line, the blue line, the green line. Play it in between time. I'ma throw my C's jersey on in the meantime and press play. When the F's done, I can't wait until the next day. Trying to stay in tune with the C's, that's the best way. Melly.
Hey there, welcome back to the Locked On Celtics podcast. Thank you for making this show part of your daily routine. I am John Karalis, host of this show. I cover the Boston Celtics for Boston Sports Journal. I'm the author of this book, The Boston Celtics All-Time All-Stars, that you can buy now on my website, johnkaralis.com. $30 makes a great Father's Day gift or a gift for anybody in your family, friends. Just buy a few. That's great. I just realized that now I definitely have to change the theme song because it says focus like Danny at the deadline, and that's not happening anymore. Obviously, continuing to talk today about the Danny Ainge, Brad Stevens news in what is a home and home podcast series with the Gino Time Podcast. So check out the Gino Time Podcast where I joined Chris Grenham and Tom Westerholm to discuss Danny Ainge's legacy. This episode here is going to focus on Brad Stevens and his all of the stuff that's going to face him. Today's show is brought to you by Michelob Ultra at only 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Stay tuned for the Ultra Moment segment coming up later in the episode. So let's bring in the co-hosts of the Gino Time Podcast, Tom Westerholm, my good friend from formerly co-worker at Mass Live, and Chris Grenham, about which I'm fairly ambivalent.
Karalis like he's going to be suggesting to Brad Stevens that he finds a trade for Chris Grenham as soon as possible. Get this guy out of here.
Good value.
Good young kid. Hopefully he reaches his potential somewhere. You can find Chris Grenham's work at Forbes, and obviously one of the co-hosts over at Gino Time. Gentlemen, we just had a fantastic conversation about Danny Ainge. That entire thing's going to be on the Gino Time feed again. Let's get into Brad Stevens here. And Brad is, as we were saying in the other portion of the show, it was the most shocking element of this whole thing, that Danny Ainge's retirement. Okay, I get it. He's been doing this for a long time. Maybe he's burned out by the whole thing. He did say in his introductory or in his goodbye press conference that, you know, the rules, the requirements, all of the regulations, everything just started to beat him down. I think when you look at how complicated the NBA has gone, okay, I get that. Now Brad Stevens is stepping into basically clean up a lot of what has gone wrong. Like when we evaluate the Danny Ainge legacy, it's the most recent stuff where he's struggled the most. And now Brad Stevens has to step in as a rookie GM or president of basketball operations. So I want to ask you guys this. The question that I asked him in the news conference and the thing that I've been writing and talking about, I'm most concerned about his ability to handle the guys that he's had this relationship with, his own guys, the Marcus Smarts, the Kemba Walkers in the world, the guys that have fought for him. As a GM, you have to work at arm's length and be kind of cold and calculating. You know, look at Danny Ainge. He traded Isaiah Thomas, like that. All of that stuff that he gets criticized for. That's kind of the necessary part of the job. Do you guys think that Brad Stevens has that in him? We'll start with Tom.
Yeah, we talked about actually over on Gino Time. We talked about your question on the podcast last night. I think that this is going to be a really interesting test. I actually do think that Brad is going to be able to do that. One of the things I point to, he is such a competitor, right? Like when you watch him coach, yes, he's like, quote unquote, mild mannered Brad and all of that. But at the same time, he's kind of ruthless. Like whenever there's a mismatch that he wants to abuse, he will abuse it over and over and over again. Like whenever there is an opportunity to like rip the other team's throat out, he will do it. And then he will shake the coach's hand very, politely and then kind of go about his business. Like he wants to beat you and then he wants to say nice things about you in the press conference afterward. Like, and I think that like that's going to translate to being the GM. I think that he's going to want to win. And I think that kind of coaching and having a really good sense of these guys, I think will give him like, yes, obviously it gives him some familiarity with guys and maybe it'll be harder to trade. But I also think it gives him a really good feel for like, here's the player that I think like works in this system. Here's a player that I think is, is going to have to go. Here's who I think complements this guy. Here are the players that I think complement Tatum the best, assuming that, Tatum is kind of like the building block here, or Tatum and Brown the best, assuming those two guys are the building block. Like, I think he has a good sense of all of that. I think that he's such a competitor. And then I think the other thing, you mentioned that a GM has to be at arm's length. He is by default going to be more at arm's length now. He is going to, he's not going to see these guys as much. He's not going to be around them as much. I think he will give him, I think just by virtue of his job, he will gain a little bit of distance and then, be able to do his GM job better, which I think will also complement the fact that, again, he is a very, very competitive dude who wants to win and who, certainly understands the difficulties and the importance and the pressures of being in a high-profile role with the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, I think Brad's going to surprise some people. I did see a lot of people voicing their concern, a lot of fans on Twitter voicing their concern about that. He's been around a lot of these guys for a long time. Is he going to be able to pull the trigger on moving some of these guys around? I don't think he's going to have a problem with that. And this is purely speculative. None of us know how Brad Stevens is going to be as a GM. We've never seen him in a role like this before. He's been a coach his whole life. So this is all purely speculative, but I think he's going to surprise some people because he knows what works and he knows what doesn't. And he kind of hinted at that a little bit in the press conference on Wednesday. But I think he has a really good idea of where they need to change some things, where they need to, stay on the same track. And like Tom said, he's a pretty ruthless competitor. Yeah, he's stoic on the sidelines for the most part, but we don't get to see all of Brad Stevens, especially in the last year. Everyone's been remote and there hasn't been a lot of, it's just in that kind of scenario, you especially don't get to see Brad Stevens truly, candid with his team. So I think he's a ruthless competitor. I think he's going to surprise some people. And I think maybe he might relish the ability to kind of remove himself from seeing these guys every day and really be the moving around some chess pieces a little bit. I just think it's going to be a difficult change for him, I think, at first, because he's been a coach for so long. But I do think he's going to surprise some people, and I don't think he's going to have too much trouble moving pieces around.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I'm really excited to see who the first guy is that he trades, because I feel like that's going to be the first indicator that we're just like, oh, he really didn't like that guy, huh?
Can you imagine if he just pulls the trigger on Marcus Smart, like all the trust comments, like, but this is what he's going to have to do. Like, he knows a guy's value, and this is where you don't know what comes through here. Is it that personal relationship, or is it the very intimate knowledge of, like, I've coached this guy for 5 years and he hasn't gotten better at this, so I don't think he's going to get better at this, so I got to move him and get somebody who can. That is certainly an element here for Brad Stevens. And I do want to hit on the point, Chris, that you brought up, because we are all reacting. We're flying blind in a lot of ways, because we, especially this year, I covered the Celtics the same way I'm doing my podcast here, talking into this microphone, looking into this camera. Like, that's not a way that you cover a team. That's not how you learn anything about these guys. So we never got a chance to go on the road and go to a shoot around and watch those guys walk in and see the looks on their faces. At that point, we'd be like, wow, man, this is really wearing on these guys. Like, we never, ever got to see that. And those little things are what can tip you off. Like, if we had seen Brad Stevens kind of walking in or looking tired, or just the way he talks to people in shoot arounds and stuff like that, that stuff could have given us a little hint of like, I don't know how he's holding up here. So I'm very curious to see what what he does, what his first order of business is. I know that's going to have to be the coaches. Why don't we hold off here? Let's talk about the coaching search in a minute. But first, we got to talk about the Michelob Ultra moment. I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit as I do a little sponsor read. It's Michelob Ultra. It's a new thing, our Ultra moment from the playoffs. So as I do this, think about what your favorite moment is, the Ultra moment from this Celtics playoff run. Now, we know that Michelob Ultra at only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories gives you joy and happiness when you're drinking one. And so as I raise my Michelob Ultra, which I'm not going to do because it's in the middle of the afternoon, I'm going to save that for later. But I think back on my Ultra moment from the playoffs. And for me, I'm going a little outside the box, and it's just walking into that arena, the TD Garden, with all of the fans there and just how much they were into the game. I think they came into that knowing that they were, that this was going to be like the end. This was more of a goodbye than a, hey, let's try to get this win in game 4. So my Ultra moment of the playoffs for the Celtics was just being able to get that one game in front of their home crowd. Chris, do you have a moment that stands out to you?
Yeah, I'm going to go off of that game as well. Games 3 and 4 were some of the only bright spots from this short-lived Celtics playoff run. Weren't many, but in that game 4, which they ultimately lost, first quarter, they played the Nets very tight. And from the jump, TD Garden was just ready to explode. Jason Tatum hit a 3. Tom talked about this on our Gino Time episode following this game. Jason Tatum hit a 3 in the first quarter, and TD Garden erupted, and he turned to the crowd, smiled, and looked up at the crowd and was just kind of laughing. The place was going ballistic. And there's a lot of times where players, even Tatum, like they're locked in, they don't really interact. He just smiled, looked up at the crowd as the place was going nuts. It felt normal, and we've been looking for any sense of normalcy. So that was definitely my moment from the playoff run.
Well, I think the funny thing about that moment was that it didn't feel normal because, like you said, Tatum doesn't usually react to the crowd that way.
It's true.
It was kind of special because, like, he did, like he let, he just kind of let the moment hit him. And I mean, we've all had a tough year, man. Like it was cool to see, and I mean, Tatum's had a tough year. Tatum's had COVID. Everybody's lost people this year. Like it was cool to see him like just enjoy a moment. So I mean, I guess I won't take that one, even though that would be my pick. Karalis throwing it to Grenham first, but I think my moment. It's not so much in the playoffs; it was more in the play-in game. Just watching Tatum go off and lead the Celtics over the Wizards. I mean, not one moment, but just like a series of just absolute buckets that he put on Chris Grenham's favorite basketball team.
Hey, just take it easy.
Yeah. But it was cool to watch, and I think it hit on kind of the larger moment from the season, which, like, if there is a positive, a number one with a bullet positive from this season for the Celtics, it was watching Jason Tatum go from potential like perennial All-Star to potential MVP candidate, potential perennial All-NBA first second team candidate. He's that good, and that game was a great example of him just saying, look, Jaylen Brown's out. I don't want to risk having to play in a second play-in game. So let's just, put the foot down now. I'm putting up 50 and I'm putting the Celtics on my back to lead them. So I thought that was a cool moment. And it was kind of an example of what I think Celtics fans can really take away as a positive from this year.
Absolutely. I do love that moment of Jason Tatum smiling. We talk about it's only worth it if you enjoy it. This is very much worth that game for Jason Tatum, like to let the crowd, like for the first time all season, he had that crowd noise just wash over him, which was great. Enjoyment isn't the end game. It is the whole game. That moment captured it. And this has been the Michelob Ultra moment of the playoffs for the Boston Celtics. We're coming back to talk about the coaching search for the Boston Celtics. We're obviously still watching the road to the finals, the NBA playoffs, which we're going to be talking about here in the Locked On NBA podcast. That is also brought to you by Michelob Ultra, which is, it's only worth it if you enjoy it. 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. We can enjoy all of the games a little bit more this season. The playoffs are awesome. It's going to be wide open, and I can't wait to watch who makes it all the way down the road to the finals, to the championship. Let's continue our conversation now with Tom Westerholm and Chris Grenham of the Gino Time Podcast, getting into the coaching search. Before we get into some of the specific names, which we'll save for the next segment, let's start here with the general concept, because this is Brad Stevens' first big decision now. He has to pick a successor. Before we get into players and trades and all that other stuff, which we talked about in the first segment, the first move right away is the coach. So do you feel, let's start with you, Tom, since you need to go first, obviously.
I deal with this every day.
Oh my God, it's insufferable, right? So let's talk big picture here. What's your take on who the next Celtics coach should be? Like, what kind of archetype of coach are we looking at?
Well, I think number one, it's got to be somebody who really, I think, relates to the players. Like, I think, Brad clearly, I think he had a really good relationship with a lot of the guys on the team. The guys on the team really respected him. Jason Tatum talked about it this season about how, this isn't Brad's fault. This is on everybody, and Brad is more than doing his part. Guys, basically universally, when you asked them about Brad, they would say something similar. He definitely got through to his guys. I would be really curious to see, somebody who just, not only a smart X's and O's guys, maybe not only a smart basketball mind, but also somebody who played, at some level, just, maybe beyond what Brad did. I think that's important. And just, again, somebody who can relate to them, somebody who, it's game 47 of a long season, somebody looks worn down, can just sit down next to him and, maybe this coach can sit down and, bring him into the office and be like, look, I was in your position. I know exactly what you're going through. Here's X, Y, and Z that I did to try to get through that. So I think there would be some value there in maybe a former player.
Yeah, I definitely think there's value in a former player who, can come in and command the locker room right off the bat. I think there was murmurs throughout the season that, has Brad lost the locker room? Brad did lose the locker room. I don't think he necessarily lost the locker room, but I do think at some point it might have clicked in his head, I can't really relate to these guys like I either once did or thought I once did. So I think that is the benefit of bringing in one of the former players like a Sam Cassell or Chauncey Billups, where they can command a locker room and yeah, they can relate to every player on that roster. Like the second those guys would step into the locker room as their new coach, they would immediately demand that respect and get the respect right away from the players. So I think that's a huge benefit. If you go, it really depends on what route they go, what kind of qualities you're looking at. But I think that is the benefit from the former player route. There's plenty of good free agent coaches. And I'm sure, like we talked about briefly on the Gino Time portion of this home and home, there's plenty of coaches actively coaching that I think will probably have their names floated around too, just because it's going to be a sought after position. So, that might change some views as to who that top candidate might be, because you're seeing a lot of Chauncey Billups, Sam Cassell talk right now. But I think there is a lot to be said about an outsider like one of those guys who's also a former player and is going to get that buy-in right off the bat, because that's the most important thing. You bring in a new coach and the players are skeptical and they don't buy in right away, you've got a problem right off the bat. So I think that's an inherent benefit with those two guys.
Yeah, there are so many different ways that they can go. I mean, you look at assistant coaches in the NBA. So there are people who are, they fit both. They're former players who are assistant coaches, and I think that's a lot of what we're looking at here. But there are also assistant coaches out there that have just done well, that have built reputations as developmental guys. You've got Wes Unseld Jr., who, and I'll say more of the names again for the next segment, but guys like that have a reputation of development, and that's a way that they can relate to players. Like these guys around the league know which assistant coaches are good and which aren't. They talk to each other. They know this reputation isn't just something that exists outside in the media. So I do wonder which of these assistant coaches might be in the mix. There is value to all of these types of people. The former NBA coach, are there former NBA coaches out there? Guys who have had experience working with these players, just because you haven't played the game doesn't mean you can't relate to these guys. And it's also in how you build a staff. Does Brad Stevens want to bring somebody in as the former player to relate to these guys and build out a staff of, look at the what they're building in Brooklyn. Former player Steve Nash, and now you've got D'Antoni, you've got other guys on that staff that handle specific elements of the offense, defense, the development, all that stuff. So I'm not 100% sure which the right way to go. I do believe that former players have to be included. Like at this point, if your staff doesn't have a former player, you're missing out. And the Celtics only have Evan Turner. And frankly, I don't know if that's enough.
Well, and not only I would agree with you. I'm not sure that it's enough. And I also I don't even know, this is another example of we weren't in the locker room. We can't know. I don't even know how involved Evan Turner was this year. The guys certainly liked him because, who doesn't like Evan Turner? Everybody loves Evan Turner. He's hilarious. He's a great guy. And Jason Tatum, after the season was like, man, when Evan Turner tweeted the rumors are not true. I'm not going to be the Celtics' next head coach. Jason Tatum quote tweeted it, man, I was hoping it was going to be him or whatever he said. But I think, to that point, I think that also emphasizes how Evan Turner probably wasn't that involved, that he was able to make a joke because clearly I'm not going to be the next head coach. But I agree with you, man. I think there's just so much value in having former players, having really smart former players who can, who can relate. Even if the head coach can't, call a player into his office and sit him down and say, I've been here before. I think it would really help to have, an Evan Turner on the bench who can, maybe not call him into his office, but who can just kind of, sit down with the guy and shoot around and say, I went through this too, here's what I did. So yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think there's a ton of value in that. And I think there's a ton of value in having a lot of different types of voices who can help with various types of things as you build out, not just the head coach, but also the assistant staff.
Brad mentioned that last portion yesterday in the press conference. He's like, players and people can be reinvigorated by those new perspectives and fresh perspectives. And I think that's going to be really important in bringing an outsider. And yeah, they'll go about their internal search. I just think it makes more sense to bring a new voice in, someone from outside the system. And there is a plethora of former players who have a good track record as assistant coaches. And I think there's a lot of benefit there. There's also good people like Lloyd Pierce who are, have head coaching experience too. There's a variety, John, you said this, there's a variety of ways that they can go here. It'll be fascinating to see which one, because there's benefits to all of them. But the current assistant former player mold, I think, makes a ton of sense for where the Celtics currently are and what situation they're currently in.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to what the people want. The people want names. Let's name names. We're going to do that when we come back after the break, and get into some of these specifics. Who's out there, and including, to me, the most intriguing name, a former Celtics assistant currently in college. We'll talk about that next. First, rockauto.com is the place to go for anything that you need for your car or truck. You want to save money, you want to save time, go to rockauto.com. Don't go to one of those chain stores where you're going to go drive to whatever strip mall they're in, give them the information that whatever your car is, and then they go to whatever shelf and pull something off and say, here, take it. You go to rockauto.com, you give that same information at your home, use your mobile device, use your laptop, whatever, and you save the time. And when you look at the prices, you know that you're going to save money because you have a very wide selection. No matter how complicated it is, no matter how simple it is. You need wipers, you can go to rockauto.com. You need something for your engine. I wouldn't know what the hell I would get for an engine. I am not that guy, but I can still go to rockauto.com no matter what it is. No different price tiers for pros or do-it-yourselfers. No different prices for what the market will bear. They are a family business who's been doing this for 20 years. So they know how to treat you right. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box when you buy something. That's how they know we sent you. If you write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, do that right now. It's an amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. I just got a new shipment of these things. They sent me these grasshopper cookie ones which are really good. It tastes like a Thin Mint. It's like a marshmallowy Thin Mint. That's not one of their regular flavors. They have these special flavors that go on every once in a while. So go to BuiltBar.com. You get the regular rotation of flavors like coconut and coconut almond and peanut butter brownie and all of those great ones. Salted caramel, which is a great one. And you'll see the nutritional value on there that is good. Like this one that they just sent me, 150 calories, 17 grams of protein, and 5 grams of sugar. So you can have one of these after a workout. You can feel good about having one. And you know that you'll get all the protein that you want, not a ton of calories, not a ton of sugar. It's perfect. If you're on a keto diet, it works. It works for the keto diets. If you have a nut allergy, they've got plenty of flavors for you. So go to BuiltBar.com right now. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your first order, or your next order, I should say. LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, Brad Stevens is going to hire a coach at some point in the next few weeks. I mean, they don't have a whole lot of time. They have time, but they don't have a whole lot of time. So let's bring Tom and Chris from the Gino Time Podcast back on to start naming names. Do you guys, I'm going to start with Chris this time for once. Relax.
I'm going to take every name. Tom's going to have none left by the time I'm done naming names.
Just go through the whole thing. Just name everybody. Have you thought about any particular short list? You guys have both mentioned former players, so I assume you're going to go the former player route. Which of these guys is most intriguing to you?
So my top 2, I put up my top 10 on Forbes this morning, and Sam Cassell would be my first choice, at least my first target, if I were the Celtics. Same mold we were just talking about before, right? Former player, brief Boston ties. He finished his career in Boston, very short time, and then jumped into coaching. He's been an assistant for a while. He was in Washington for a bit, and then he's followed Doc Rivers from LA to Philadelphia. So I think he is a guy who could command a locker room, relate to the players really well, and I think he is someone who's been in the discussion for head coaching vacancies for what feels like too long. I feel like he's been due for a head coaching job for a year or two now, so it's only a matter of time. It's more so when, not if. So I think Sam Cassell makes a lot of sense. Away from the player side, I know this isn't a very popular pick, but I really do like the possibility of Lloyd Pierce. Brad Stevens is a really big fan of his. He spoke glowingly of him at seemingly every turn. The quote that kept circling yesterday was from the Celtics matchup against the Hawks shortly after Pierce was – actually, it wasn't against the Hawks. It was against the – I don't even know. But it was shortly after Pierce was fired in Atlanta. And he spoke really, really highly of him. Pierce also has experience coaching the Celtics core, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, and Marcus Smart at the FIBA World Cup. I know he's got a really good relationship with Jaylen Brown. And I just know he's really highly regarded among the coaching network in the NBA. So, yes, he didn't have a great track record in Atlanta. I think he was in kind of a tough spot. I don't think everything really broke his way there. There was a variety of factors in play. But I think Lloyd Pierce is someone who is going to have a really good shot at this job as well.
Karalis, we talked on our last, on the other side of the home and home, or I mentioned that you and I, I've talked a lot of basketball. I've talked a lot of Celtics. We often, our opinions often overlap. So given your lead in, I think you and I both have the number one option, the same one. Kara Lawson, I give it a shot. I think Kara Lawson would be a great option here. She has a relationship with several, members of the Celtics. She coached Marcus Smart when she was in Boston. Marcus loved her, talks often about how much he liked her and everything that she did. So she has, she knows these guys. She's been around these guys. She is a former player. And I just think I think that there's a lot of value in that. I think, again, having that prior relationship with these guys, not just, Grenham, you and I have talked too. I think Lloyd Pierce is probably a little bit underrated among Celtics fans as an option, again, because of that, those prior ties to the Celtics players. But I mean, it's not the same as being around them for an entire year. Brad has obviously said, glowing things about Kara in the past. He joked last year that the Celtics could barely keep her because, other teams were just coming after her so fast. I think that she is a future NBA coach, and I think the Celtics would do well to be the first team to give her a shot. I think there could be a really good pairing there.
You think about all of the things that you go into the player coach, the former player who comes into to coach. We all love the former point guards, right? There are a number of guys who are out there that weren't, but it's the former point guards that tend to get these jobs that the cliche, they're the ones, right? So she's a former point guard. She's not just a former point guard, a very successful one, but also not like Jason Kidd, who just was so elite that you get by on talent alone. So she's had to work really, really hard for what she's gotten. She commands respect. I heard Brian Scalabrine talking about her on the Celtics Talk podcast. They had some of their TV coverage there, and he said, like, you talk to her, you talk basketball with her for 5 minutes, and you're like, whoa, okay, this person's different. That she commands the room. That the players respected her. Look at what happened when she left. I mean, the guys were falling over themselves to congratulate her. I mean, everybody wore those Duke shirts. They really, really said goodbye. You notice, and I don't know if Brad Stevens told them not to or what, but no player has said, hey, thanks, coach. Good luck on Instagram or anything. No one's posted anything about Brad Stevens. No one's posted anything about Danny Ainge either. But they really went out of their way to congratulate Kara Lawson. And I think the guys love her. I think they respect her. I think she quickly earned their respect with her basketball knowledge. I think she, at the very least, will be a strong candidate if she wants to. The only question is, she just got to Duke. Does she want to leave Duke 1 year in? And that would be really crushing, I think, for a lot of the women that she recruited to go over there. All of a sudden it's like, hey, great, we get to play for Kara Lawson. Oh man, they would understand, I think, but I'm curious to see if she's going to really go for the job.
I think there would be a lot of value for her in this job, and I think her players would recognize that. And I also think her players would probably see how cool it would be to have the coach who they bought in on and the coach that they respect be a real trailblazer, be the first woman to coach an NBA team. Yes, I'm sure if you're at Duke, you're disappointed, and she's a really good coach, and I'm sure you probably wanted to play for her. But at the same time, if I was a former player and I really had a good relationship with my head coach at college, if they got a chance to do something really special and really historic like that, I think I would be pretty pumped for them.
Yeah, the part that worries me, because I think it would be awesome if the Celtics brought in Kara Lawson. I think it would make a ton of sense on a variety of levels. But I could also see Kara having that loyalty aspect where she just brought in her first recruiting class and she only got to go through 4 games last season because they had to cancel the season because of COVID concerns. And I could see part of her wanting to, stick it out for a little bit there. Granted, very difficult to turn down an NBA head coaching position if it is offered to you. So who knows how that would play out. But the fact that she has what seems like tremendous relationships with basically everyone on this roster. She knows the system. She knows the personnel up and down the organization. There are so many hurdles you have to jump when you bring in an external coaching candidate. She's essentially an internal candidate. You know what I mean? So that makes the process so much smoother. So I just think that makes a lot of sense. Again, who knows if she'd be willing to leave Duke, and who knows how hard they'll press her on that, but Kara Lawson has to be in that top tier as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody involved, I would hope, I think I'm just thinking of myself as if I'm the Duke athletic director, and I'm just like, look, yeah, I know you just got here and all of that stuff, but I would approach her before she even said anything. I'd be like, look, I know that if you want to go for this job, it's not just history, but it's one of the greatest coaching jobs in the entire world. One of these prestige NBA franchises getting to be the coach. It's the Celtics, it's the Knicks, it's the Lakers. You go, I mean, those three basically, the Knicks, the big major, been around since the beginning of the NBA. There's something special about coaching those particular teams. And, sorry, not to say anything about, bad about the Memphis Grizzlies. It's a great team and all that stuff, but you're an NBA coach is an NBA coach, but coaching the Celtics and coaching one of these prestige NBA teams, there's something like, oh yeah, that can be, if you win a championship in Boston, can you imagine? So I hope that she enters the sweepstakes. Short of her, I think I'm leaning towards the former player type, but I'm very curious to see not just the head coach that gets hired, the assistants, the staff that gets hired, and really we haven't talked about Jay Larranaga, Jerome Allen, Scott Morrison, who I think are the three prime internal candidates. Brad Stevens talks about a fresh perspective, and we've talked about bringing in somebody with a new voice and this former player. Do you think it's possible that any of these guys that are already here to help ease the transition? Because look, every new coach has his own personal style, and you can be, say, Jerome Allen and work for the Celtics, but know that, hey, if I was coaching, I would do this differently. I would use this. I would whatever. Do you guys think that any of these guys are serious candidates for this job, or are they all just kind of like done here? Because if they don't get hired, then I can't imagine that they all stick around.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have a new coach come in. They often bring their own staff, right? That's just kind of the way it works. With the way it seems they're approaching this in terms of a shakeup, an organizational shakeup, which has already clearly begun, it just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me to go the internal candidate route. That being said, there are good candidates on this staff. Jay Larranaga was a finalist for that Hornets job. He went in for a couple interviews down to Charlotte. They ultimately went with Borrego, but he's a legitimate candidate who's always in the conversation when there's a vacancy. Jerome Allen was a coach at Penn, so he has head coaching experience. Scott Morrison, I think, might be like slightly below those two guys in terms of the tiers of these internal candidates, but obviously he coached the Maine Red Claws, and he has that head coaching experience. So
former G League Coach of the Year.
Former G League Coach of the Year. I mean, yeah, I don't want to like knock the internal candidates is what I'm getting at, because I think they are really good coaches and good candidates. I just think the way the Celtics and Brad Stevens are approaching this coaching search to continue the shakeup, it just leads me to believe that they're going to go with an external candidate.
Yeah, I think that's right, because when you think about, yes, like the Celtics are shaking things up because Danny Ainge is no longer the GM and Brad Stevens is no longer the coach, and that's wild. But like Brad entering the president of basketball operations role, that is basically like it's a shift, but it's like reshuffling the cards that were already in the deck. So, I think if the Celtics want fresh perspective, fresh voice, fresh all that, yes, like Jay Larranaga or, Scott Morrison or Jerome Allen or any of these guys, like Grenham said, I think they're all, really good coaches. And I think down the line, all three of them will be or will continue to be head coaching candidates. But if the Celtics are looking to shake things up a little bit more, I think they have to. I think even though they would be in a new role, I think they have to put some new cards in. Kind of change some things up a little bit more, because if all of this, if all of the voices or most of the voices are still kind of the same, I wonder how different things actually would be, or if they would kind of just kind of like stay a little bit the same, maybe a little different, maybe a fresh perspective here and there. If they want like kind of, some real change, some real freshness, I think they have to, I think they do have to look outside the organization. And I know that does kind of contradict what I was saying about Kara Lawson, but I don't care.
She's the internal candidate,
Yeah. So, okay. Other names here. I agree with that stuff. It's a shame. These coaching jobs are so, they're so coveted, and it's hard. So, I mean, there's gonna be changes here. And hey, look, Jay Larranaga was on Doc Rivers' staff, and he survived. He came and he stayed. Like, these guys are. There's no guarantee that they're going to go. I mean, there is. I think, and it depends on who they hire. Is it a former head coach? Is it is it Lloyd Pierce? So then if it is Lloyd Pierce, which does make sense on some levels, I think all of these names make sense on some levels. Then I can see, hey, I want to keep one or two guys that have been here. And so maybe one or two guys that are on the staff stick around. And I want to bring in these former players. So maybe you call up some of these guys who are coaches on other teams and say, hey, do you want to come over and be have a bigger role as an assistant on my staff and whatever. Or if it is a former player, let's say we haven't mentioned Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups is a name that's going to get thrown around a lot. Chauncey Billups makes sense because, again, he's a former point guard, but he's a guy that has not only seen a lot in the league, but I think his championship in Detroit with like the starless Detroit Pistons is a great kind of like experience to have to say, hey, I know how to play together. I know how to get guys to play together. He could say, I want some consistency here. And he can construct his staff in a unique way. So I don't know which of these guys is going to stay or go, but I think when we look at the short list, sure, you interview internally and maybe one of those guys, knocks your socks off, but I don't see that as the way everything has been shaping up here. So I think Billups, Cassell, Darvin Ham's name gets thrown around in coaching circles around. He's credited with working with Giannis in Milwaukee and having that experience working with Giannis. Well, you got Jason Tatum here. Like I've worked with Giannis and helped him kind of, in his development. I can work with you and help you with your development. That's a great one. And then I think Brad Stevens, I just think he's going to be turned on by like the defensive coaches. So an Ime Udoka from, Brooklyn, like these defensive minded guys are going to appeal to Brad Stevens' defensive mindedness. And I think if I'm going to skew any way, I'm going to skew towards those types of coaches that may also then turn around and hire offensive minds to be on their staff.
David Vanterpool is another defensive-minded guy who I think lines right up with that. Like you mentioned, Udoka did really, really good work in San Antonio before going to Philly for a year and then to Brooklyn, I think. There's a lot of guys who do line up with Brad Stevens' mindset. So he could find some form of continuity with an external candidate. It's possible to go that route. If he does go the former player, current assistant route, like a higher profile one like Cassell or Billups, does he want to take a shot on Billups, who's only been an assistant for a year? Does he go with Cassell, who maybe there's a little more stability there from a coaching standpoint? So again, there's a lot of ways he could go here, but I do agree that maybe Brad will lean towards some of those defensive-minded candidates in terms of narrowing this search down.
The one thing that I think would be kind of funny, I mean, if Brad wanted to emulate his predecessor, would be if he just got somebody that nobody's talking about, which will be difficult to do because I feel like every single possible coaching name has been named by someone on Twitter or somewhere, or like writing a post somewhere or something. Like I genuinely don't know how many more potential names there might be out there. So that will be interesting. But Danny did shock the world by hiring Brad, so maybe Brad can keep the streak alive.
Hey, if the Celtics help me out and they take Scott Brooks off my hands, I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
I'm kicking you off the show.
I was trying to tell you to get this guy out of here right at the time.
You've been saying it for a long time. But you know what? Let's wrap it up here. None of us have mentioned any of the college coaches. None of us have said that they should dip into the college ranks again. Juwan Howard's going to be the biggest name out there. He hasn't been at Michigan very long, but he's been very successful at Michigan. Now, I feel bad every time I bring up his name because I don't want him to leave Michigan. I do not want to be the team that poaches him into the NBA because I like what he's doing at Michigan. And just from a story perspective, I would like to see him stay at Michigan for 20 years, be like the Coach K of Michigan, and just ride into the Hall of Fame as a Hall of Fame coach with multiple national championships at Michigan. I think what he's doing there has been great. I would love to see how he does as an NBA coach, but I would rather have him have a ton of success there. I don't know how you guys feel, or if there's anybody in the college ranks that makes sense for Boston.
I think the only other guy from the college ranks that I would look at pretty hard is Jerry Stackhouse. I would take a look at him. But yeah, I mean, Juwan Howard he's clearly the peak of the college guys. I think of the other guys. I mean, and I do wonder. I think generally, if you ask coaches who have done both, like everybody wants to be in the NBA. Like the college grind is such a grind. Like I'm sure Juwan Howard, like he is he's doing really, really well at Michigan, and I'm sure he seems to be connecting with players and putting together a great system, and he seems like a very high level guy, and there is probably the potential for him to coach there for 20 years and ride into the sunset. But at the same time, if an NBA job comes along at some point, it does feel like, all right, you mean I don't have to recruit anymore, or like the recruiting I have to do is very minimal? Like that's just anybody I feel like would be enticed by that.
Of course.
I mean, Brad Stevens was enticed by that.
Yeah. And Jerry Stackhouse certainly would be too. I mean, Stackhouse has some experience. He was a head coach of Raptors 905. He was an assistant with the Raptors, worked with the Grizzlies, and then he went to Vanderbilt. So he's got a versatile background. It's not like he just started coaching yesterday. And I think he might be a little far off from his pro coaching debut, like head coaching debut, but I think it's, a matter of time until he gets a head coaching job. Juwan Howard is a legitimate head coaching candidate whenever something opens up. I mean, he was a really successful assistant for a long time in Miami before he went to Michigan and kind of just hit the ground running. Like he's been a really, really successful college coach. Does he want to come back to the NBA? I'm sure at some point, but I don't know if that's now because they have a really good thing going in Michigan. But if you're the Celtics and you do want to look at the college ranks, Juwan Howard has to be number one on that list.
Yeah, a couple of other names that have been thrown around that I've seen. Chris Holtman, who he joined. You want to go the Butler route? Wow. He went to Butler after Brad Stevens left as an assistant, took over there, and now is at Ohio State. And Tony Bennett, Virginia won a national title, and at Virginia is a name that's come up that I've seen thrown around. Is a number of different Coach of the Year awards, and is a defensive-minded guy. So a couple of those college names that are out there.
Tony Bennett comes in, runs the Boston Celtics. They're averaging 54 points a game in the blink of an eye. It's going to be awesome.
I like the Celtics have one of the most like electric young players in the NBA. Imagine Tony Bennett coming in and just ruining Jason Tatum.
Crushing. The thing is, when a lot of these college coaches get thrown around in coaching searches, which is inevitable, it happens no matter the position that comes up. A lot of them, in my mind, like Jay Wright, always thrown into the mix. He's a guy who is just made for college. Tony Bennett, made for college. I don't see him coming in and successfully motivating professional athletes. I see like a John Calipari type experience. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yep. I agree. I 100% agree that there are just some guys are just college coaches. And I don't want to say just college coaches. That's just perfect for them and their personality. They're going to be great at it.
Yep.
Be great at what you do. But that's not going to stop them from being thrown around and just, for naming names. Well, I might as well name names that are being named. So thanks for the conversation, guys. This has been great. We'll see, man. This has been an eventful week. Thank you, Celtics, for juicing the podcast numbers. I'll tell you that. We went from a season where I was like, well, nobody's going to be listening now to, oh my God, I want to do 3 podcasts a day. You're listening to this stuff. Again,
it really did hammer home the parallels between this season and the 2018-19 season, where you got to the end of the year in 2018-19 and like nobody was reading anything, nobody was listening to anything. As soon as the season over, just literally rocket ship to the moon. Everybody wants every piece of content. Read, listen, watch, anything. Content.
So wild that even when they had the championship season, just looking at numbers when I was writing stuff, and like the championship brought high numbers, and then the off season just increases the numbers so much. People cannot get enough off season NBA talk, especially after a bad season, because it's just like, how do we fix this? And now with all this stuff, oh my God. So I guess I'm thankful for the Celtics keeping it interesting. So again, we talked about Danny Ainge's legacy on the Gino Time podcast. So we've been talking to each other for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I'm sick of you guys. I'm getting you out of here.
Right.
Thanks, guys. Tom Westerholm, Chris Grenham. Thank you. Check out the Gino Time podcast. Again, that's where we talk Danny Ainge. Obviously, subscribe to this podcast. If you're coming over from the Gino Time feed, subscribe. Locked On Celtics is here everywhere you get podcasts and on YouTube. There's a YouTube show. So make sure you're subscribing to that and sharing the podcast. If you're a regular subscriber, tell your friends that they should be listening to the Locked On Celtics podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network.